Glory to you, O Lord. But about that day or hour no one knows, not even the angels in heaven, nor the Son, but only the Father. As it was in the days of Noah, so it will be at the coming of the Son of Man. For in the days before the flood, people were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, up to the day Noah entered the ark. And they knew nothing about what would happen until the flood came and took them all away. That is how it will be at the coming of the Son of Man. 2 men will be in the field, one will be taken and the other left. 2 women will be grinding with a handmill, one will be taken and the other left. Therefore keep watch, because you do not know on what day your Lord will come. But understand this, if the owner of the house had known at what time of night the thief was coming, he would have kept watch and would not have let his house be broken into. So you also must be ready, because the Son of Man will come at an hour when you do not expect him. This is the gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, O Christ. Please do take your seats. The story is told of a meeting of the Connecticut House of Representatives in the United States in May 1780. It was a bright sunny day. The delegates were working hard. They were debating things, and they didn't need any lighting because the sunlight was streaming into their debating chamber. So they were in the middle of this debate about some minor issue when, during the middle of it, as the speeches were going on, people noticed the sky beginning to get dark. And it just got darker and darker and darker. And eventually, well, it was a solar eclipse. Not that anyone at the time knew that that was happening. People began to catch on to this sky just blackening and blackening and blackening. And, well, basically turmoil erupted. People began to call for the debate to be adjourned. People began to pray, wanting to go and gather together. People thought the end of the world was coming. Now, I wonder, if that sort of thing were to happen today, well, it couldn't, could it? Because we'd know that an eclipse was coming. But if something like that were to happen, if we sort of looked out and we didn't hear the rain falling, but we just saw it getting darker and darker through these windows around us, how would we respond? How would your average person in the street respond if that sky getting darker thing happened without any explanation that we could come up with? We have our own fears in an age like ours of that kind of global catastrophe. Hollywood makes lots of money out of it. Maybe in the 80s, nuclear weapons. Today, climate catastrophe. But that sense that all of humanity could be engulfed in something terrifying lingers. And how do we respond to that? In our reading this morning, that gospel reading, Jesus talks about something of that magnitude happening. Much more. The end of the world. Something beyond your ability to understand. All of life on this planet coming to an end. Time itself, as we experience it, having this rupture in it. God coming and pulling all the strings together. I guess for most of us, even that idea sits uncomfortably. It feels like a relic of a bygone age. But when Jesus, if you like, turns the dial up and says, not only is that cataclysmic event coming, none of us know when. That sort of unknowability really doesn't sit well with a society, a generation like ours, where we know more than anyone ever has, where we look back on those people panicking in 1780 and say, if only they knew all that we know, they'd be fine with it. To think that there's something of this magnitude which none of us here and no human being who's ever lived has any idea about. Maybe you're terrified at this point. Certainly people throughout history, as they've thought about the end of the world, it's done them psychological damage. Could be today, could be tomorrow, could be next minute, could be right now. Oh, it's not right now. You know, you go on and you think, that's going to put you on edge. C.S. Lewis, who's probably, well, definitely my sort of Christian hero. I quote him more than any other writer, I'm sure you've noticed. C.S. Lewis found this such a difficult thing that he said in the end Jesus was probably wrong in this sort of what he was saying here. It's one of those moments where I really struggle to follow C.S. Lewis. But he says, this is such a strange and unusual thing. So hard to get your head around, not only the end of the world, but that no one knows about it. That there's, you know, the disciples are kind of misinterpreted Jesus at that point, is basically what he says. But if we don't go that route, how is Jesus' return? Unknown, coming, certain, but not sure when return. How is that good news for us this morning? I think there are two facets in that passage of how it really, really is good news. And even the fact that it is unknown, completely unknown, as Jesus keeps stressing, even that, I want to suggest, is good news for us this morning. The two facets are very simple. It's good news for the whole of society, and it's good news for us as individuals. So first of all, the whole of society. And the key to understanding what's going on in this part is that little picture, that word picture that Jesus gives, as in the days of Noah. As it was in the days of Noah, he says in verse 37, so it will be at the coming of the Son of Man. That's, if you like, his sort of interpretive key to what he's talking about with the end of the world. And it goes something like this, I think. In Noah's day, Jesus, as a good Jew, would know the accounts from Genesis. All of his readers would. In Noah's day, the world had got so dark, the world had turned so wicked and evil that there was nothing that could be done but for God to step in and act decisively. That was the key to the whole sort of flood narrative as it's recorded in the Bible. So in this part at least, the emphasis is not so much on the suddenness and the unknownness of Jesus' return, of the end of the world, but on the justice of it. The world, Jesus is saying, is going to get to a point where only God can make it all right again. That there is injustice layered upon injustice, that there is darkness upon darkness, wickedness upon wickedness. That means that in the end, the only one with the power, the right, the authority, the wisdom, the insight to right every wrong, to fix every injustice, is God himself. Just as in Noah's day, so it is the need of every age for God to step in and make it right again. And he will do that one day completely, perfectly, and fairly. So Cornelius Plantinga, who is an American Christian, put it like this in one of his books. God's kingdom, in other words, the entering of God into our society, has always sounded like good news for people whose lives are bad news. If you're a slave in a Pharaoh's kingdom or in a Mississippi cotton kingdom, you want the kingdom of God, and you might even sing your longing in spirituals. If you live in an African village that has been decimated by the AIDS epidemic, you want the kingdom to come so much you can think of little else. If you're a Christian woman there who lacks the cultural clout to say no to men who don't care whether they kill you by having sex with you, then you want God's kingdom with every fiber of your being. Your kingdom come. I should explain that Christians who pray in this way are not asking for the kingdom to come into existence. God's kingdom has been in existence forever. Your kingdom come means your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And for that to happen, hearts will have to be regenerated and much more besides. For the kingdom to come, God will need to step in decisively and make it all right again. And that's the promise of the end of the world. Now, here's the thing. It's not that pursuing justice for ourselves, for our world, is kind of ruled out by this. It's not like the point of this is, well, if God's going to do it all, then forget about it ourselves. That's, I hope we'll see what we'll come on to in the sort of second point. It is a good thing and a right thing to strive for a better society in all kinds of different ways. The point, though, of the end of the world is that ultimately there is only one who can make it all right completely and perfectly. All human attempts at justice, even the very best justice, will be sort of laced through with injustice somewhere along the way. And at times that injustice will be glaring and gaping and obvious. But the end of the world says, Jesus' promise is that there is a day coming when every wrong committed against every person will be completely righted. Now that might sound, well, too much. How can you possibly do that? That's kind of the point. You can't. I can't. But there is one who can, and he will. The end of the world is the best news for societies, particularly societies where you know that things aren't the way they are. And here's the challenge for us. We live in a society where most of the time, most of us can feel like, we're being treated fairly. I might get frustrated when someone cuts across me at the lights, but, and I might think, they'll get their comeuppance one day. But basically, life is fine. But if you're in those societies that Plantinga mentions, can you see the point? This is good news if you're longing for justice and are faced only or mainly by injustice. So the end of the world is good news for society, but even more so, it's good for our own souls. It's good for us as individuals and for our souls. And this is where we come on to that difficult thing. Jesus saying we don't know. And he really does underline that point, doesn't he? About the day or hour, verse 36, no one knows, not even the angels in heaven, nor the Son, he himself, but only the Father. And his whole point is, because you don't know, wait and watch. That's the thing he really wants to sort of drive home for us. And I think the reason in the end is that knowing that this end is coming, but not knowing when, is the most powerful and vital force to direct your own soul, your own self, and to control it and channel all of who you are as a human being towards good ends, not bad. It's striking that in the very next story along that Jesus tells, he uses very powerful imagery to talk about, how to wait. And he gives an example of someone who waits in the wrong way and abuses their position. I didn't read it out, but verse 51, when Jesus comes, he will cut this person to pieces, it says, and assign him a place with the hypocrites, where there'll be weeping and gnashing of teeth. If you are someone who looks like they're doing it all right, but taken advantage of the gap between the now and the not yet of God's coming in justice, if you take the advantage of that to abuse people, especially if you look like you're doing it all right, then God's retribution on you will be fierce and serious because of justice, because that's what justice calls for. But then how does not knowing when the end will come actually change you for the better then? Well, here's an analogy that C.S. Lewis gives. I said negative things about him earlier on, so I want to share with you in an essay he wrote called The World's Last Night. I think he captures this not knowing when, but it's going to come idea so helpfully and so importantly. This is the analogy that he gives. A man of 70, he says, need not be always feeling, much less talking, about his approaching death. But a wise man of 70 should always take it into account. He would be foolish to embark on schemes which presuppose 20 more years of life. He would be criminally foolish not to have made long since his will. Now, what death is to each man, the second coming is to the whole human race. If there is an end coming, but you don't know when, that will keep you from thinking that your grand schemes are going to be the thing that changes the world forever and ever. Because one of the dangers of thinking that way is that it covers up, it justifies your own selfishness, your own wicked heart leading you astray along the way. So again, Lewis says, I can imagine no man who will look with more horror on the end than a conscientious revolutionary who has, in a sense sincerely, been justifying cruelties and injustices inflicted on millions of his contemporaries by the benefits which he hopes to confer on future generations. Generations who, as one terrible moment now reveals to him, were never going to exist. Then he will see the massacres, the faked trials, the deportations, to be all ineffaceably real, an essential part, his part in the drama that has just ended, while the future utopia had never been anything but a fantasy. If the end of the world is coming, but you don't know when, the ends will never justify the means in your behavior. That's the point. It will never be okay to sort of short-circuit doing the right thing, the just thing, in order to get a good outcome. Because you don't know when it's all going to be brought to an end. And if you're in the middle of, conducting some dodgy deal, which you can tell yourself is for the benefit of everyone, but the world ends in the in-between, you're going to look like a fool. And that's the point. That sort of dynamic works out in each one of our lives, if you like, brings an immediacy to our decisions, to our relationships, and says, treat people right for their own sake, not because you've got some better outcome at the end of it all. So it keeps you from that kind of grandiosity that so easily enters the human heart. You might not be a revolutionary torturing people, but it works out in each of our own lives as well. Thinking that the end of the world is coming, but you don't know when, helps you to focus on just the day that God has given you and the good that he has called you to do in this day, and not to worry so much about tomorrow. In that sense, I think the end of the world, as Jesus talks about it, and that idea then of verse 42, keeping watch, it has this effect if you get it. It sends you back into the tasks that God has put before you, the relationships and the duties that he has given you as you understand them, with a new and deeper and richer and fuller motivation to serve in all those ways. This day's work is good and noble, and get on with it. Sometimes that will require you to be extraordinarily brave. Lewis gives the example, it's obviously fictional, a character, a very minor character in Shakespeare's play King Lear. This is what he says. This minor character, Shakespeare has not given him even a name. He is merely first servant. All the characters around him, Regan, Cornwall, and Edmund, have fine long-term plans. They think they know how the story is going to end, and they are quite wrong. The servant has no such delusions. He has no notion how the play is going to go, but he understands the present scene. He sees an abomination, the blinding of old Gloucester, taking place. He will not stand it. His sword is out and pointed at his master's breast in a moment. Then Regan stabs him dead from behind. That is his whole part. 8 lines all told. But if it were real life and not a play, that is the part it would be best to have acted. In that moment, just doing the right thing, in the play obviously is fake, gets him run through. Barely, doesn't even have a name. But you read that play and that's the guy you want to be, doing the right thing, whatever the cost. Sometimes it will look like that kind of bravery. Oftentimes it will look like, quite boring, as you just commit to all those relationships that God has put you into, caring for your family, connecting with your friends who are in need, doing your job as well as you can, all the various duties that are God-given. That is how to respond to the end of the world and not knowing when it comes. It gives an enormous, extraordinary dignity to every single moment of your life. And that's what the Speaker of the House of Representatives in Connecticut understood better than, I think, all of his contemporaries. In the midst of that turmoil and commotion, when the sky was darkening outside, people wanting to go away and pray and panicking, this is the end of the world, the Speaker said, look, we're all upset by this darkness. Some of us are terrified by it. And then he said this, the day of the Lord is either approaching or it is not. If it is not, there is no cause for adjournment. And if the Lord is returning, I, for one, choose to be found doing my duty. I therefore ask that candles be brought, and the debate carried on. If Jesus' return is real, then the call on our lives this day is to serve him without grandiose visions of where that's going to lead, but faithfully to follow in his footsteps in this day, these tasks, with this group of people, and trust him about the rest of it. Let's spend a moment in silence pondering these things for ourselves. And then Andy Patton is going to come and lead us in our prayers of intercession.